Good morning. How's everybody this morning? Good. Well, that's a fantastic thing. I'm Cody. I am from Decatur, Alabama. I'm in charge of working with Project Unify. I'm an outreach minister for the Decatur Church of Christ. And we started something called Project Unify, and that's kind of what I'm here to discuss with you a little bit about this morning. But we're going to look at some places in Scripture. So if you've got your Bibles, open them up to Matthew chapter 25. That's where we're going to begin this morning, Matthew chapter 25. And we're going to ask a few questions. Hopefully you're talkative. This will be a lot easier if you are, and we'll see how that happens. I told CJ that if I need a question answered, he volunteered to take it, or I volunteered him. Either way you take that, it'll be just fine. But Matthew chapter 25, we're going to start in verse 14, but I'm going to begin this with a question. When we talk about talents, and talents that people have, stuff that you're good at, things that God has blessed you with an ability to do, things that you can use to help the kingdom overall grow, there's a lot of times that people struggle with using their talents. They don't know how, whatever it may be. Let me ask this question. What do you think is the number one challenge people have when it comes to using their talents that God gave them? What do you think the number one struggle is when it comes to people using their talents that God has given them?
Is it recognizing their talents?
Maybe recognizing their talents? Okay, I've got three. That's one of them. Maybe they just simply don't know what their talent is. There's a lot of times that you'll ask someone, do you think you could fill in and do this or that? And they say, no, I'm not a teacher. And you say, well, what talent do you have? Well, I don't really know. And they've never really searched it out to find out what talent has God given them and how they can use it. What else do you think? What are some more challenges that may be there because people don't use their talents?
I think fear, yeah.
Fear? What do you mean? Elaborate a little
I
bit.
think sometimes we are afraid to try things new.
Maybe so.
We just don't feel confident that we can do it, so we just don't.
Maybe so. That definitely could be one. Maybe it's fear. There's times that you hear people that say, I have never set up a Bible study because I'm scared I won't know what to do. I'm scared I won't know what to say. I'm scared maybe they'll know more than I know. And we have those fears that are real. Or maybe we're just scared to try to step out and do something we've never done. What else do you think may hinder someone from using their talents?
Getting out of the comfort zone.
That's probably the biggest one. Getting out of your comfort zone. You may know exactly what your talent is, but that may mean that you've got to step out in front of somebody that you never have, or it may mean you have to get off the couch. And nobody likes to get off the couch. It's pretty comfortable on the couch. That's why we have a couch, because it's comfortable. And there's a lot of times that getting out of the comfort zone will stop someone. I've narrowed it down to about three things. Either you don't know what your talent is, or you just simply neglect your talent and you're not that skilled in it because you've ignored it for so long, or thirdly, you just don't care. Generally, everything falls into one of those three. When it comes down to you don't know or you don't use, sometimes we don't use it because we want to stay where we're comfortable. We don't want to step out. We don't want to try something different. We don't want to get involved in something that we've never done, so we don't use it. Maybe we're scared, so we don't use it. So either you don't use your talent, maybe you don't know what it is. You've never, searched in yourself. You've never searched the Scripture to say, well, what talents did God give? What could a talent look like that I may have? Am I good at something? Or one thing plaguing our country today, there are so many people that just don't care. We'll come in and we'll sit in a pew on Sunday morning, if we do that much, and we may say that I was there, but when we go home, we don't really care about growth of the church. We had a young guy that was asking how come the youth group wasn't growing. He was baptized when he was about 12 years old, and I said, let me ask you, you're 17 now, so 5 years you've been a Christian. He said, yeah. I said, how many Bible studies have you led in 5 years? And he just kind of sat there quietly. And I said, well, the church isn't going to grow if the Christians aren't trying to be evangelistic. You're a Christian, and you've been a Christian for 5 years, and you've never tried to have one of your friends in a Bible study. Don't expect the church to grow if the only thing we do is don't care. He would rather be, doing the things he wants to do. And he said, I've never thought of it that way. Since then, our youth group started to grow. Some different guys that had never done anything, because before, they didn't really care about evangelism. That was the preacher's job. They didn't care about evangelism. That's why we had a youth minister. They didn't really care about evangelism. Their parents did that kind of stuff. But as soon as it clicks that every Christian has an obligation to be evangelistic, things start to change. And that's why in Matthew chapter 25, starting out in verse 14, Jesus is going to be talking about a few things. He's going to be discussing out what it means to have talents, what it means to use those talents, and he's going to talk about those that don't use those talents. So when we talk about caring, when we talk about trying things, when we talk about it, what it means to be evangelistic as a Christian, that's a lot of what this parable is going to be about. So chapter 25, verse number 14, If somebody will, read verses 14 and 15 for us.
For it is just like a man about to go on a journey, who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. And he went on his journey.
Do you think the man who received 1 talent had any struggles in that moment right there when he saw everybody gets talents divided amongst them? What do you think was going through his head?
I can't do it.
Okay, maybe he's thinking, I can't do it.
Or they don't think I can do it.
Maybe. What else do you think maybe went through this guy's head? This is just your opinion, because there's nothing here in Scripture to tell us exactly what he thinks. What do you think maybe goes through his mind?
Somebody else will do it.
Somebody else will do it? What else do you think?
Probably fear
Maybe fear?
of handing somebody else's money.
Maybe so. I've always wondered if he looks at the other guys and like, well, they got more than I got. What if I lose this one? What? You know, they've got extra. If they lose 1 or 2, they've still got more to use. What if I lose my 1? I mean, can you imagine being just a 1-talent man? And that, you know, 1 talent's the only thing that you've got. So what are you going to do with that? You don't want to lose it. You don't want to mess it up. You don't want it to embarrass you. So instead of letting it embarrass you, maybe you just try to tuck it away and hide it because, you know, I don't want to be embarrassed because I only got 1. They got 5. They got a lot more than me. And so often we compare ourselves to other people. God has blessed us with a talent, but because I'm not the best song leader, don't ever expect me to sing. Well, if I look through the Scriptures and I know that God has instructed part of my worship is to be singing, and I don't sing because I don't have the same talent as someone else, I'm being disobedient to God. And what happens to us when we're disobedient to God? What's the ultimate outcome? We're lost. Heaven can't be your home if you're not serving God, especially if we know that He's given a command and we just don't care, so we neglect that command. That's one of those things we just talked about. 3 of the reasons people don't use their talents. They don't know, they don't use, or they don't care. So watch as we get a little further in. They immediately go, he goes on this journey. We get down to verse number 16. He received the 5 talents, went and traded them, and made another 5 talents. So this guy goes out, he takes a chance with things, he makes an effort. I want you to keep those words in mind. He made an effort. That's the whole difference in this whole thing. Everything throughout the rest of this parable comes down to what effort is made. So he takes an effort to get more than what he's already got. How is the church going to grow? We're going to have to make an effort at reaching those who are lost to help the church grow. So he goes out and he does this with these 5 talents. Likewise, he who had 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug it in the ground and hid his Lord's money. Ultimately, what does that mean he did?
He did nothing.
He did nothing.
He was comfortable where he was. That's the way we get. We're comfortable where we are, so we don't have to do anything.
He did the absolute least that he possibly could. Have you ever heard that phrase, you know, it was the least I could do? I think that might be my least favorite phrase of all time. You know, you go through a horrible day and somebody brings like a tub of ice cream to your house. And, hey, I heard you had a bad day. I just wanted to cheer you up. You say, well, thanks. And they say, well, it was the least I could do. I mean, what else could you have done? I could have had a lot better day if you did more than just ice cream, and you chose the least you could do. Now, that's a very selfish way of looking at it. Don't get me wrong. But I hate that phrase. When we intentionally go into something doing the least that we can do, what do we expect the results to be? Have you ever met a parent that, well, you know, when their kids are raised and they were terrible kids, just awful kids, they grow up to be absolute heathens. You know, they're in and out of, you know, some prison somewhere, and they say, well, what did you do as a parent? Well, I did the least I could do, and I'm proud of it. You ever heard somebody say that? You did the least you could do as a parent? Can you imagine God telling us, the people that He sends His Son for, well, I'm going to do the least I can do. Well, He sure wouldn't send Jesus if God was going to do the least that He could do. We'd just be lost, and there'd be no hope for us. Our kids would never be taught the gospel. Our kids would never be taught how to do mathematics. Our kids would never be taught how to function in society if we choose to do the least that we can do. So God's issue right here, Jesus' issue with this guy is that He chose to do the least He could do. I'm going to make sure that I've still got this one. I'm going to tuck it away. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to stay comfortable. I'm going to do the least I can do. It's never going to be a good outcome. Let's get down to verse number 19. If somebody will, read verses 19 through 21 for us.
After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they used his money. The servant who had entrusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you have given me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. So now I
So the guy that he gave the most to, he said, you've been faithful with a small amount. Now imagine how much less the guy with just the one talent over there was. He definitely had a small amount, and he chose to do nothing with it. Keep that in mind. He did the least he could. But how does this master feel about his servant who went out and did something with what he was given? How did he feel about it? He was pleased. He was pretty proud of this guy. By a show of hands, do you want God to be proud of you? I think that's all of us, or we wouldn't be here. We'd be wasting our time being here if we didn't want God to be proud of us. When I get to my judgment day, I sure don't want God to say that, wicked and unfaithful servant, you lazy thing. It'd be like walking back into my house after Dad told me to mow the yard and I decided to go play the Nintendo Mario instead. You lazy thing. I don't want to get to my judgment day, and that's what God tells me. I didn't like hearing it from my dad, much less my heavenly Father. So when we talk about talents that God has given us, we've got to ask ourselves, what talents do we have and what are we going to do with them? Probably the most important part of all of these portions that we read. Verse number 25. Somebody, if you will, read verse number 25. I was scared. I was scared. When you read through the book of Revelation, we're talking about this guy that only had one talent and how he hid it. And he just tucked it away and he said, I'm going to make sure you at least got what you started with. And he gives it back to him. When we read in the book of Revelation that we're finding out who all is going to be in a burning lake of fire, did you know that the word coward is one of the groups of people listed that is not going to make it to heaven? Cowards. This guy's living in fear, so he's doing nothing for the kingdom. He's just living in fear. I'm scared to use my talent. I'm scared of what people will think if I use my talent. I'm scared of what the person that owns these talents is going to think. I'm just scared of everything, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to stay comfortable. And he does nothing. So when we talk about, what we're doing right now, and we're bringing this in to talk about Project Unify, which is our disaster relief ministry, it's important to keep in mind that we could stay comfortable. We can. And whether you do disaster relief, whether you do work in nursing homes, whether you do work as a minister, whether you're just trying to reach the rest of your family with the gospel, maybe you're just leading Bible studies with your grandkids, that stuff is the most crucially important things that we can possibly be doing. Everything we do as a Christian needs to be with the purpose of spreading the gospel. So I'm going to talk to you for just a second about Project Unify and what it is, because I don't ever want us to get to where we're in verse 25 and we're describing ourselves as being afraid. We're not using our talents because we're scared. We're not using our talents because we don't know what they are. We're not using our talents because whatever it may be. So let me ask you this morning, are there any men in this congregation that maybe you think, I'll never be a preacher? Maybe preaching's not your talent. Is there anybody that thinks that? We got a lot of preachers in this room. Geez, all of you guys? Well, we got two honest men in the room. No, they weren't scared. The rest of you guys, you know what happens to cowards. I'm just kidding. They're not scared to say, I don't think I'll ever be a preacher. But let me ask you this. Do you know what your talent is? What's your talent? What's something you're good at? Just throw something random out there. What's something you're good at?
Talking.
Do what? Likes to lead singing. How are you going to serve God with that? That's rhetorical. How are you going to serve God with your ability to lead singing? And how can you reach people that aren't just in this building with a singing voice? That's kind of where I was when I started asking myself, what am I going to be good at? What am I going to do? And so I decided, one of the things I like doing the most is running a chainsaw. So I can either be like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and tell people, you got to join the church or else. That's not going to work out so well. I'll probably get arrested really quickly. Or we can try to serve people through the ability to run a chainsaw. And I think about so many men that believe, well, I'm never going to be in front of the congregation. That's just not me. I don't like being in front of people. I'm not comfortable speaking. I'm not comfortable with a lot of people staring at me. I'm not comfortable whatever it may be. One of my closest friends, his name's Will, he doesn't really like being in front of people. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm a contractor. I build homes. And I said, so you can run equipment, you can build stuff, you can help people, you can serve people? Well, yeah. And I said, do you think that maybe somebody could learn the gospel by your example of what you're doing to help people, to teach people to run equipment? Well, I guess so. And I said, well, then you don't ever have to get in front of a large crowd to spread the gospel. You just need to talk to the people that you're helping. One of the talents that was never given, when we read through all of Scripture, one talent that is never given is the talent of silence. God gave you a voice to use it. He gave you a voice and the ability to move to use it. He gave you everything that you have for His glory. So here's where we're going to start. About 3 years ago, we did this journey. We bought a truck and we brought a 16-foot enclosed trailer, and we said if the people in our town will fill up our trailer, We're going to haul stuff to places that have been hit by tornadoes and hurricanes and disasters. We're going to haul stuff to them, and we're going to try to make sure that if they have a need, we can fill it. So we would drive into a town, we'd unload this trailer, we'd leave. We'd load it up the next time, we'd load up, and we'd haul it to a town, we'd drop stuff off, and we'd leave. And so after doing that for a few times, you pat yourself on the back because you feel really good, because benevolence is an incredible thing. But benevolence without evangelism for a Christian is done in vain. I want to repeat that to make sure you hear it. Benevolence for a Christian without evangelism is done in vain. What I mean by that is we can help a lot of people, but if it's never for the gospel, then why are we doing it? The reason I say that, when we would travel these places, I'd look around, and I noticed that Walmart sends an 18-wheeler full of goods, and they drop that off. Walmart's doing what we're doing. I'd look around and see Dollar General would bring in a truck, and they do the same thing. Every denomination that you can think of the name of would bring in a trailer, and they would drop stuff off, and they do the same thing. And then we would leave, and we'd say, good job, I'm proud of myself. I feel good about what I did. And the bigger problem that comes out of that is I say, I am proud of myself. I am proud of what I did. It starts to become about self. And so we get to Mount Juliet, and I'm going to tell this story again in just a little bit because it's so important. We get to Mount Juliet after Mount Juliet got hit by tornadoes about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. This place is absolutely leveled. I mean, like if this building was in Mount Juliet when their tornado came through, you wouldn't even have the carpet left because it peeled the carpet back off the foundations, and there was nothing but concrete slabs everywhere. It was so bad. I've never seen destruction like what they had in Mount Juliet. And so we go into this one neighborhood where some houses were still partially standing, and there was a tree laying across the back of one. I walk across the street and I asked this lady, I said, ma'am, I said, I know you got a tree across the back of your house. I said, can we cut it up for you and get it off the house? And she says, are you with that church group up the street? And I'm thinking, arrogantly, yeah, we're with that church group up the street. And I say, yes, ma'am, we are. And she says, I'm an atheist. I'm not interested in your help. Go on. And I'm like, well, that was blunt. That's not the way I thought that was fixing to go. I thought it was fixing to be, oh, you're with that church group. We're so proud of you, young man. That's not what happened. And that was eye-opening in ways that you can't imagine. So I walk down the stairs, and I'm walking down the driveway, and I'm thinking, man, now that's just defeat if I've ever felt it. But the thing was, I asked her about a tree. She asked me about how I was connected spiritually, and I didn't elaborate on anything spiritual. So I turned around about halfway up the driveway, and I turned around to walk back, and I asked her, I said, ma'am, I really care more about your soul than I do about your tree. Can I at least pray with you? I understand you're atheist, but can I pray with you? Her neighbor was standing by her, and her neighbor kind of nudged her like, be nice. And so she said, okay, fine, whatever. Her husband keeps walking around the house ignoring everything, so we stop and we pray together. About halfway through the prayer, I still don't remember anything about what was said in the prayer. If I had to assume, it was prayers for recovery, prayers for help, prayers for just guidance. About halfway through the prayer, she just starts crying. We're eyes closed, heads bowed, and she's just absolutely boo-hooing and just losing it in tears. And I'll probably get emotional if I keep telling this story. But as we get done with the prayer, and I said amen, and I kind of looked up, she looks at me and she says, young man, I just realized there's a God. And I see him in all the people across the street. So she sees God for the first time in the body of Christ that was trying to serve other people. People that were running chainsaws are helping spread the gospel. People that are putting tarps on roofs. People that are saying, can we pray with you? People that are just simply doing something. They're doing the opposite of what this man did with his one talent. He buries it because he's scared to use it, so he chooses to do the least that he can. And we get out here, and all of a sudden, because the body of Christ is across the street serving, an atheist for the first time believes there might be a God because what she sees the church doing. There are so many congregations in this country and across the world that the only thing that the world sees us do is sit in a pew. Don't get me wrong, I'm not neglecting or belittling the fact that we come to worship. If we're not at worship, we can't get to heaven. Let's make that clear. And don't think I'm neglecting that at all, because that's just a biblical fact. We have to be at worship, but there's not going to be a heaven for us, period. We come together. We don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together. That's required. But what do we do the rest of the week? So many times, the only thing that the world is going to see, they don't see a city on a hill. We don't even hardly turn the lights on Sunday mornings, much less the rest of the week. And so here's some people that during the middle of the week, maybe on a Saturday afternoon, they said, I've got time. I'm going to go serve somebody. I'm going to go do something with what God has given me. I'm not just going to show up to what He's required. I'm going to do the evangelism that He's requested. I'm not just going to do the minimum. I'm not going to do the bare amount. I'm going to do something with what God has given me. You mentioned like being a song leader. One of the stories that we've got that is, I guess one of the happiest ones. So we're in Louisiana. And if you don't know him, Willie Franklin, I don't know if y'all know that name or not. Willie Franklin is like one of my closest friends now. He's incredible. So we're going through Louisiana and we're trying to help some people. And if you're with Willie very long, you'll learn very quickly he just loves to sing. That's just something he likes to do. So we go through this one neighborhood that had just been slammed by a tornado that came through with the hurricane. They didn't have much hurricane damage. There was a tornado in the hurricane that just ripped up a bunch of mobile homes and RVs and stuff. So we're walking through and Willie's going through singing the song Glory Land Way. You know, he's just walking down the street. I'm in the way, the bright and shining way. And then a voice on the other side of the RV park starts singing, I'm in the glory land way. And Willie's like, somebody knows that song. So he slowly keeps singing, working his way through, finds this guy, they start singing together. They're getting fired up and excited. The dude's just lost his home. And he's smiling with tears in his eyes, just singing along. And all of a sudden we start talking and he says, yeah, nobody else in my neighborhood's a Christian. By the time we left that town, there were 13 more with him. He wasn't by himself anymore. Because somebody was singing. All of a sudden, somebody took notice. Can you imagine going into Walmart and like nobody, maybe you're one of those weirdos that likes Walmart. There are a few weird people in the world and they like Walmart, but everybody else that's normal does not like Walmart. And can you imagine, you go to Walmart and you realize, you've got like one paper bag and it's going to cost you $372.94. And you didn't even get what you wanted yet. You still don't have anything on your list. You just saw stuff on the shelf that you were like, oh, that's not that expensive. But before you know it, that one bag is expensive. And how miserable you get. And you get to the cereal aisle and there's so many options and there's 15,000 people and 20 kids that are running up and down the aisle. And everybody's loud and everybody's grumpy. Everybody's annoying. But on the other side of the aisle, you hear something. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. How much better does Walmart feel when you start hearing gospel songs coming through Walmart? Now, don't get me wrong. We might be scared of our voices, and we might choose to never use our voices. But that is disobedience to God. God tells us at the end of the book, 2 Timothy, he says, if you have something to be happy about, what does he say to do? He says to sing. If there's something that you're sorrowful about, what does he say to do? He says to pray. But we ignore those instructions. He says, if you're happy, what does God say to do?
Sing.
How many of us sing when we're happy?
I do.
We've got a few. But so many times we forget that God instructed that. And all of a sudden what happens is people that are miserable because they're in Walmart are starting to think, hey, that doesn't sound... Now, if I was singing, they might be like, I wish you would be quiet. Doesn't sound so good. But if you've got a talent for singing and you just walk through a place where most people instead get grumpy and shut down and don't want to communicate, but you come through, you're being the city on a hill, the light of the world, you're being different than everyone else in Walmart, people are going to notice. And they're going to wonder why. And that's why God said to let your light shine so before men that they may know your good deeds. He says don't ever hide your faith. That's what he's saying. He's saying don't hide your talent. Don't bury your talent because you've got a talent. Now what are you going to do with it? That's the question. So Project Unify begins immediately after Mount Juliet tornadoes. What happened while we were there is we realized something. One, we've got to be more evangelistically minded. We have to start using our talents. And to give you more proof of why we need to do so, in Matthew chapter 25, if somebody will read verse number 30 for us, just verse number 30 by itself.
And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Okay, so as bluntly as you can put it, where did that unprofitable servant end up? Where'd he go? He went to hell. I mean, that sounds harsh. It sounds horrible. It sinks your heart just hearing it. It doesn't even feel comfortable saying it. It feels like something we should never let come out of our mouth because it doesn't feel like something we ever would want to say. But that's exactly what Jesus was telling us, is that what happened to this guy, it wasn't heaven that it was home anymore. This guy literally was on his way to hell because he was choosing to do nothing. He was choosing not to use the talents God had given him. He was choosing not to heed the instructions that anyone else. He didn't follow the example of those who were being faithful. He wasn't worried about any of those things. He just got scared. He was a coward. He buried a talent. When his master came back, he said, all I've got is what I started with. If you're not growing, you're dying. No matter what age you are, no matter if you're the 12-year-old that was just baptized, if you're a Christian, you've got stuff to be doing. You've got to get busy. If we're 102, there's a lady right now, her name is Miss Gray. She is 103 years old. She lives in Fultondale, Alabama. She, for the past year at Sunday, at 2 o'clock every Sunday, is in the first Bible study she's ever been in her entire life. A tree laid across her house during a tornado last year. Knocked on the door. We said, hey, we got to get you out of this house. The house is working on falling. Let's not leave you here. We put her in a hotel. We kept up with her, and we said, hey, Miss Gray, would you be interested in a Bible study? She said, in 102 years, nobody has ever asked me to have a Bible study. How does that happen? How is that even possible? I'll tell you exactly how it happens. We got lazy and we buried our talents. We forgot about evangelism. We just focused so much on worship by itself that we neglected the evangelism that God had instructed of us. And the church, within 102 years, this lady lives in the Bible Belt, and she's lived there for 102 years. Get this, she lived in the same house for 102 years. That is one old home. And nobody ever asked her to have a Bible study. I don't even know if Hollywood could come up with a script that was that crazy that 102 years go by with nobody asking to have a Bible study. So for every Sunday at 2 o'clock since then, she's been in a Bible study with a guy that lives in Fultondale, Alabama. Maybe she'll get there and she'll be baptized. Maybe. We can pray about it. But I want you to know this. When we reach a point where we just don't care if we use our talents or not because we're so busy with everything else, we've got jobs, we've got entertainment, we've got this, we've got that, these kind of things slip through the cracks. And we miss opportunities for 102 years. She was receptive. She wanted to know more, but nobody had ever asked her. Nobody had ever offered. That's what happens when we start burying those talents. Souls are lost because we don't do anything with what God gave us. So when we leave Mount Juliet, we decided we've got to be more evangelistic. So we decided instead of benevolence, instead of the pat on the back of I did good, I feel good, let's make it about God. But if it's going to be about God, what does that include? It's got to include the kingdom. Because if we're only after something for one congregation's benefit, then that puts us in a pretty arrogant light, in a position that leaves us thinking, oh, well, it's only about us. We've got to grow our numbers. And anytime it's a numbers game, it's not going to work out well for you. Especially not in 2022 when most of the numbers in the world don't really care because all they've ever seen a Christian do is put on a corduroy suit jacket and sit in a pew for an hour. That's the only thing they think we do. They don't see anything else happen during the week. We get so scared to use our talents in Walmart that they've never heard a gospel song. We get so scared to ask somebody to have a Bible study that we don't study enough to find out if we could lead a Bible study. And we're scared to lead a Bible study because we don't study the Scriptures daily. Did you know one of the things God commands us to do is to be in the Scriptures daily? How many of us can say that I've been in the Scriptures for the past 7 days? I've opened my Bible every day for the past 7 days. If we're honest with ourselves, some of us, but a lot of us would not be able to say that we've opened it within the past 7. Maybe we opened it 7 days ago because it was Sunday and we were at worship. Maybe we don't even bring our Bibles to church anymore because we just listen because somebody puts it on a screen and we don't even open the Scriptures ourselves. We've gotten into such a lazy mode that we don't even do anything God's commanded us to. Therefore, our talents are neglected because we've never grown our talents. The guy that used his 5 talents, what happened next? What happened next? He used them. Do what? He got more. He got 5 more. The guy that had 1 talent, maybe his only talent was the ability to read. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's all he's got. It's just the ability to read. And he never used it. So what else did he have? He had no stories to share about converting someone because he never read. He never had anything to tell somebody about somebody that he had taught something to. He didn't have the ability to say that he taught his children the gospel because he never used his talent. He never had the ability to say that his wife was stronger in her faith because of what he chose to do. He couldn't say that. He couldn't say that there was anybody that had ever learned anything from him because he had never used his talent. He could never say that he had anything more than the ability to read, and he didn't even do that. There are so many things that God commands of us that we so casually brush off because we're so busy. When we look at our calendars, it's just packed with all kinds of things that don't honestly really matter all that much. We've got entertainment venues, we've got these things, we've got those things, we've got schedules all over the place, but we don't open our Scriptures daily, so our talents aren't growing. We don't sing and we don't use our voices in places because I'm scared of what the person on the cereal aisle might think. I'm scared maybe they'll say, be quiet. I'm scared of this, I'm scared of that, I'm terrified I won't know enough, I'm scared that I won't be able to tell you the answers. I'm scared that maybe I'm wrong. And so we don't study to see if we're right because we're scared we might be wrong. Like that makes any sense at all. So after we get done in Mount Juliet, we realize these things. We've got to start using our talents. So many of our men have the ability to do things, but they don't want to be a preacher, which I get it. Not everybody's made for that. That's not everybody's talent. All three of these people received different talents. So what if you're not going to be a speaker? What if you're not going to be a Bible class teacher? What are you going to do? Because God's still giving you a talent. He promises us that all of us have something. So Project Unify begins, and we take Decatur Church of Christ by itself. And we started saying, okay, this has to be about the kingdom. We can't do this by ourselves, and it has to be something for people to use their talents. So the first thing you're going to do if you're going to do a ministry is you have to get a whole lot of money, right? You got to have money or you can't do ministry. Is that right? How much money do you remember Jesus having? I mean, he had to send Peter fishing just to get money out of a fish to be able to pay a tax. They didn't start with money. What did they start with? Do what? They started with themselves. They had who they were and the talents God had given them. So that's where Project Unify, we decided it has to start there. It's got to start with who we are and what we've got to offer. That's the kingdom. That's how that works. So we started talking to congregations we were in good fellowship with. And we said, hey guys, would y'all like to join in to Project Unify? This is our disaster relief. It is 100% about evangelism. Our whole goal is to set up Bible studies and to teach the gospel. And we're going to do that through disaster relief. Would you like to join in? And they said, well, give us some figures and how much is that going to cost? And that's the whole point. It's not going to cost money. Now, maybe you got money and that's great. And if you want to share that, let's do it. But it's not about money. Just like every person has a different personality, so does every congregation. And I mean, some congregations think certain jokes are funny. Other ones will tell you, get out of the building, that wasn't very funny. Some groups will tell you that we're workers. Some groups will tell you that we're computer guys. Some groups will tell you all kinds of different things. Every congregation has its own sort of personality. And so every congregation that's going to join in with Project Unify says, what can we do? You've got to discover your talents. You've got to ask yourself, what do you bring to the table? And so as these congregations started joining in, here's what we had. In our first year of Project Unify existing, Decatur Church of Christ covered the insurance for our truck and trailer. Priceville Church of Christ said, if you ever need cleaning supplies, our congregation will gather all of the cleaning supplies. The Hartselle Church of Christ, they said, if you ever need roofing supplies, we will gather all of the tarps and all of the roofing nails. And that's how, so they're joining into Project Unify with cleaning supplies, tarps, and roofing nails. The next ones that joined in, they said, well, we don't really have much money. And I said, well, we're not after the money. They said, well, we can't even really go buy the stuff. Our members are very poor. I said, well, what are you good at? And they said, well, we've got some of our ladies in one of our Tuesday morning classes that they write letters to people. And that's one of our ministries. It's just card writing. So they joined into Project Unify by writing cards to people they've never met. The only thing they know is they're writing a letter to someone that has been devastated by a storm. And so in that envelope, we started taking the cards that they had. We had another congregation that donated gift cards. We put the gift card in the envelope, and every family that we help has a letter written by someone that says, I love you, and I don't even know you. And I know you've been through something tragic, and I'm praying for you. And if you ever want to hear another voice on the other end of the line that prays with you, here's my phone number. If you would like to write back, here's my address. And so we give every family we help a letter that has been written by someone they don't even know. And so this congregation, the only way they joined Project Unify is Tuesday morning, they had some ladies that write cards. That's a talent. That's a ministry. That's an opportunity that is being taken, that so many of us take for granted, the ability to write. And that is their whole outreach of evangelism, is trying to reach people and say, we'll pray with you. Here's the preacher's number. Here's my family's number. If you need us, we're here. And the next one that joined in, they were very small, like 20 members. And so we had a guy, he took a pen and he wrote a 100-mile circle all the way around Decatur. If you've got any Bible studies within 100 miles, I'll go once a week to make sure they're being followed up with, to make sure nobody falls through the cracks. Guys, just simple things like that. Saying that, what can I do? Well, I can drive this distance once a week. I can make sure that somebody is being taught the gospel. I can do that. Well, there's an opportunity to join in. So Project Unify begins with those 5 congregations. And we start doing this thing, and it starts to grow. And so within the first year, we had 23 baptisms. And we had just, went different places. 13 of those were in the same neighborhood Miss Gray was in that I was telling you about just a little bit ago. Her street, so after Fulton, it's about 28, her street comes in and goes all the way around. And as it goes around, there's mobile homes all the way around it. We've got a 13-year-old young man that saw a lady that her house wasn't destroyed, but her car was. Her friend was dropping her off, She was carrying her groceries into the house. Now, I want you to make sure you think about this. This is simple, but it means something. She's carrying her groceries in. He says, hey, he sits a saw down, because we had taught him how to run a saw. He's 13. Sits a saw down, and he says, can I help you carry your groceries in? And she says, well, sure, that'd be nice. He grabs a couple bags as they make trips in and out. And he says, where do you worship at? And she says, I don't. And he says, would you like to have a Bible study? And she stops and she goes, while I'm carrying my groceries? And he says, no, later. And she says, well, I think I could do that. He's 13. Nobody's going to tell a sandy, blonde-headed young 13-year-old boy that he can't have a Bible study with her. So they take the groceries and stuff in. A couple hours later, he says, I'm going to go back over there. He sends one of the adults with him. He leads a Bible study with a lady who is 67 years old. Now, we had taught him and trained him. He knew these things. He wasn't lazy. He got after it. He was busy, always making sure he knew the scriptures. 2 days later, this lady is baptized as a 13-year-old young man carrying groceries. He served someone. She said, yes, you can have a Bible study with me. 2 days later, she's immersed into Christ. Because that's what it's about. Do what you can. You know, the only thing you may be able to do is help carry a grocery bag in a house. But that's a talent and an opportunity that God has given you the strength to be able to move something. A talent is the compassionate heart that says, I want to help someone. What he did with the ability of that talent is everything that led into the evangelistic side. So as Project Unify continued to grow, things that were that small are really that big. They're not small at all. They're huge, because how many of us get so busy that we won't even stop to try to help somebody? And I'll tell you one of the big things. We mentioned earlier, fear was something that stops us a lot of times from using our talents. If you're on your way home today, and let's say you go by the interstate, and there's somebody with a sign that says, anything will help, are you going to stop? Now, if we're honest, most of us are probably going to say no. And don't get me wrong, that is not wrong. Because fear needs to be real. We have to be good stewards, and we have to be wise. I've got kids in my car with me, one of them who's 4 years old. If I stop that vehicle to try to help somebody and then they try taking over my van, what am I doing putting my family in jeopardy like that? But if I never stop and try to help somebody, what example am I setting for my kids? So let me tell you something I've done with my kids that made a difference. We saw somebody that needed help. And they said, are you not going to help them? And I said, not right now. I said, I'm going to take you home and I'm going to come back. And if they're still here, I'm going to try to help them. So I take my kids back to the house. They stay there with their mom. I get in the van. I head back down to Target where this guy is standing and it says anything will help. And I ask him, and 9 times out of 10, they'll tell me that, I've got this sob story, but then they'll get in their BMW 2 hours later and they'll drive home. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, really? But every now and then, we meet somebody who genuinely needs help. And I met this one guy, his name was Bruce. I met him in a park in the middle of Winchester, Tennessee. And that was before we moved to Alabama. And I went back, after I dropped my kids off at the house, went back to go help him. And I said, hey man, what's going on with you? Oh, just had a rough time. It's tough. And, things are hard. And he had a little sign on his window of his Jeep. Anything will help. He was living in his Jeep. And it was rough. That's all I know to say about that. It was just rough. So we helped him out. He ended up coming to our congregation, parked his Jeep a little closer to where the church is. About 3 months after going back to help this guy, guess what happens? What do you think happened?
He became a Christian.
He became a Christian. Thank you for the positive outlook. Most people say, he left and took all your money or something. No, this guy's immersed into Christ, but don't get me wrong. Be a good steward. Don't put your family at risk and in jeopardy. That's not wise. That's not good parenting. That's not good grandparenting. And some of us, that's not good great-grandparenting. But we've got to do something, because what the example we set for the next generation is either going to be that of fear or compassion. And God tells us what fear is going to lead us to. It leads us to being a coward, and cowards will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. So we've got to quit being so scared that we're going to mess something up or someone's going to harm us, and we've got to start learning compassion. But compassion as being a good steward. Do it with wisdom. That's part of what Project Unify was about. So many times we go into neighborhoods, and one of them that we went to in Louisiana, they got hit by a hurricane. We find out that they're not really in that bad a shape. They've still got some stuff. The houses aren't too bad. The houses were already bad before the hurricane, but they're not really any worse than they were before. But we realized they kept showing up and trying to take all the supplies that we were bringing in. And so we started asking questions, and we said, what all do you need help with? And they said, well, guys, we've been out of work for the past 7 months. COVID just absolutely crushed us. Well, we're here for disaster relief, and you guys are just, having a hard time. When we start helping these folks, and there's a whole Pentecostal congregation. We didn't know that everybody in the neighborhood was Pentecostal. but they had had a really hard time. So we helped them with the supplies and all this stuff. Their church building had been demolished, and this is crazy, and I don't know if this is wise, but it worked out really, really well. The LaPlace Church of Christ said, okay, you can come worship in our building. Now, they're inviting the Pentecostal church to worship in their building after the morning service, and they said, but there's rules. You know, we're not going to have any craziness. We're not going to have any instruments. We're not going to do these things. Blows my mind. An entire congregation of a Pentecostal group was converted to Christ and got rid of the instruments. They were taught the difference in what speaking in tongues and why that went away. They were taught the difference in the prophecies and why that stuff just gets in your head and it's not realistic. They were taught all, and they left all of that stuff, and now they're members of that congregation. Now, I would never open my building up and be like, sure, any denomination, come in here and do what you want. That's terrible decision making. But it worked because they had compassion, and they said, we're going to put rules, we're going to be good stewards, and we want to study. The most important part of all of that is they said, let's talk about the Bible. That's what changed it. It wasn't the niceness and the compassion they had. It was that they did something with the compassion they had for those people. And an entire congregation of folks was converted because of it. So when we talk about disaster relief, there are physical disasters, there are spiritual disasters, there are emotional disasters, there are all kinds of things. And generally when there's a physical disaster, all three show up. The physical, the emotional, and the spiritual disasters. And they're all there and they're all real. So when we talk about Project Unify, we ask ourselves, if I just lost everything, what would help me? If I went to your house today and took a bulldozer and ran it flat over, destroyed everything you own, what would you hope someone would do for you? Would it be the little things? Would it be a card that was written? Would it be a Bible being placed in your hands? Would it be a prayer that was said on a sidewalk in front of a home? Would it be a tarp being put on your roof for free? Would it be somebody that can run equipment like a skid steer and be able to take all the trees off the stuff that you had left so you can pick through the rubble? Would it be furniture when your house is burned to the ground and you don't have anything left? What would you need? What would you want? What would you hope someone would do for you? And if you can do it, join in and do it for someone else. That's the whole point of what Project Unify is about. We're going to talk about that more during the sermon, but I want you to be thinking before we get to the worship service, what does it mean to use my talents? What talents do I have? And what hinders me from using those? Because without using them, remember what verse 30 told us in Matthew chapter 25. The unprofitable servant was cast into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For those of us that are going to bury our talents, this is a heaven and hell issue. This is real, and it's as real as it can possibly be. And it can't ever be about one congregation or another that's going to grow. It can't be about numbers. It's never going to be about making sure that one place or another gets more attention than the other. It's not a competition. The kingdom is united. It's one, not multiples. Is there a bell that's going to ring? Because that's at 15 after, and I keep thinking there should be one, but I didn't see it yet. Do you have any questions at this point before we get to our worship service? Any questions about Project Unify, maybe spiritual questions about what we just talked about with talents, maybe anything like that? If you have any thoughts or smart remarks, we can take those too. All right, well, like I said, before we get into the worship service, I want you to be thinking about what talents God has given you. What can you do with them? How can you serve Him better? And how can we avoid the fear that causes us not to use them? How do we get to a point where we just care more? Where we have a deeper understanding and we say, I'm going to do something with what God has given me. That's where we'll stop for now, and we'll see you back in services.